In today's episode, we are going to discuss those hard to tier, hard to rank quarterbacks that we really struggled with. We're going to talk Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray, Jodan Love, Michael Penix, and a few other shout outs that we're going to give some other people we struggled with. Stick around for all that and more. And welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. I'm your host, Justin, joined as always by David and JP. So if you followed us for our last episode where we talked about how we tier quarterbacks and our tiers as well as just general quarterback strategy, we alluded to this episode. We drop on the ones we really struggled with tiering, ranking, etc. So these guys right here, if you have a strong value on, if you have a strong take on, these are guys that probably other people are struggling to value as well. So if you believe in them, potential buy opportunities, we're going to go into our cases for all of those guys. Starting with Anthony Richardson, who in our tiers we have in the third tier as a consensus. JP, you are a little bit higher on Anthony Richardson than us. Go ahead and talk about why.
There's so many similarities that I see from Jalen Hurts before he broke out to Anthony Richardson. You know, if you bought Jalen Hurts before he had that breakout MVP season when everybody was questioning, like, oh, is this guy, is he really all that good? If you bought him, you profited big time. And I think Anthony Richardson could be that next guy. Even if he doesn't have that super, breakout MVP caliber season, I still think he's going to be a top 5, top 6 quarterback. He just needs to stay healthy. I think that's literally it. If he just crosses that, I think he's going to be there in that top 5 fantasy scoring conversation for sure. Last year, Anthony Richardson, he had the most fantasy points per dropback of everyone last year. Now I get it, it's a small sample. It's all we have to work on. It was not only so that's better than the Jalen Hurts breakout, the Josh Allens, these big seasons. It was incredible what he did on a per snap basis. He was on pace for 170 carries and 111 of them being designed carries, not just scrambles, which that would have tied in the design category with Jalen Hurts for the most in the NFL. And we know how much those design carries, are huge for Jalen Hurts, especially in the red zone, within the 5 zone. But since 2011, there have been 35 quarterback seasons where the quarterback threw the ball at least 300 times, so essentially they were just a starter. And they had at least 5 fantasy points per game rushing. 89% of those guys hit at least 18 fantasy points per game in a 4-point passing touchdown. And that's a low-end quarterback one. And I think Anthony Richardson, with the weapons that he has, I love his wide receiver room. I think Josh Downs, if he's your second or third wide receiver, I think that's fantastic. A.D. Mitchell was exactly what they needed because Josh Downs and Michael Pittman, I think they're both great, but they're not the best vertical threats. And if you're going to say there's one thing that Adonai Mitchell does really well, he can stretch the field. His RAS score is one of the best we've ever seen. So I think that A.D. Mitchell, if he's your third wide receiver option, you're upgrading from Alec Pierce to A.D. Mitchell. I think that's huge. Shane Steichen, we saw what he was able to do in Philadelphia. What happened when he left? I mean, that offense did not look the same. Not at all. And then the Colts offense looked way better, even with Gardner Minshew. They were a pretty darn good team. They were this close. They were so close to making the playoffs. Yeah, so I think Shane Steichen is incredible. And now he's going into year 2. Anthony Richardson, he's able to learn the playbook. Even though he's injured, he's still learning. He's getting all these tips, and they're going to focus on trying to keep him healthy for sure. If you don't buy him now, it's going to be really, really hard to acquire him when he starts breaking out this upcoming season. And I know you guys are a little bit lower than me on him.
The big difference is you talking Jalen Hurts. That offseason you're talking about, he was a mid to late second round startup pick, where A-Rich is going 107, 108, 109. If you have him 110 in a startup, like that's about as late as you'll see him go typically. So it's just the price compared to the ceiling for me, the risk that's baked in. So if he was going at the 201, 202 even, so even earlier than Hurts was then, like I'd still be more in at that price. It's just you're seeing him go over guys that I think I have a little more confidence. Sometimes you'll see him go over Burrow. Always you're going to see him essentially now going over like a Herbert, who I think I like a little bit more. And that sample size is just tiny, like 3 games basically, because of how often he was knocked out of a couple of those games with injuries. I know you never want to predict injuries, but it's just for me, I need to see a little bit more to be taking him here. I know I'm going to miss out on it. Like if he hits, yeah, I'm missing out on this buying window. But to me, there isn't really a buying window because he's priced so high right now. Like you're paying 90% of the ceiling right now.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what you're saying there, Justin. I don't deny the upside, and if you do hit on him, it's going to be huge for your roster. One of the biggest concerns we had with him as a prospect was his lack of experience. He really only had one season as a full-time college starter. He appeared in other games, but it was mostly due to his athleticism, his rushing ability, and things. And then we look at last season. He played in 4 games, and 2 of them he finished. The other 2 he left with less than a third of the snaps, so basically 2 and 2/3 games. He was, I think, QB4 and QB2 in the 2 weeks that he finished, so excellent upside. We see that's there. It's very undeniable, but I'm a little less willing to lean into the volatility when we're talking about the other players that are around him here. In May 2023, DLF startup ADP was QB9. So his rookie year, he was about QB9. He's all the way up to QB6 this year in May startup ADP. And I know, Justin Fields was above him, Justin Herbert was above him, fell down. And so he's just got to move up by attrition in some senses, but he's ahead of Joe Burrow right now, which I don't really agree with. And, if you want to say Herbert's below him because of the market, I understand that. I'm happy to hold him if I still have him, if I got him in a rookie draft last year. If I can sell him high, cool, but I'm happy to hold him and just hope it hits. But I can't really buy him at the prices he's at currently right now.
What's the difference in value between him and Hurts? Would it be like a first, or would you say, or like a first and a second?
I'd probably need a first. Even then, it would depend on my roster, just because I know what I'm getting from Hurts. If we get what we want from Richardson, it's basically what we're getting from Hurts.
Yeah, you said the inexperience. That's definitely an issue. But I just think what he did without being experienced was insane, and I think he can just only build off of that because the more experience he gets, I think he'll get better. But he makes some great points as well.
Yeah, he's in a great situation, and the upside is there.
JP, if you're right and you make the bet, depending on the price you have to pay, especially if you're already holding him, you got to love it. It's just a cost benefit analysis for both of us. I'm hoping for your shares you're right, but I own a lot of 25 firsts of teams that have Anthony Richardson, so I'm rooting against him. I'm a hater. What can I say? One guy that I don't hate, however, our next quarterback that we're going to talk about, also in tier 3 here, Jodan Love. JP and I love us some Jodan Love. For me, it's just the fact that I think this guy, it's like the Spider-Man meme for me. I know I'm projecting a little bit, but for me, I think there's 4 quarterbacks that I think are kind of like the same guy. That's CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, and Jodan Love. None of these guys are super mobile quarterbacks. I think they can all run a little bit. They can do a little bit with their legs. For example, Love last year didn't do a lot. 247 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns. That's about 3 fantasy points a game, more or less. So a little bit of a baseline, but you're not counting on anything. That's kind of what I'd expect from all of those guys. They can scramble a little bit, maybe a QB sneak every so often. They're all guys you're hoping on touchdown variance for. I think that Love, I'm projecting he's going to be as good as he was his rookie year, not from a touchdown percentage, but just from a from an NFL stance. I know he improved a lot later in the season. JP will talk about that later. But what I looked at when I'm looking at his touchdown percentage rate overall, his touchdown percentage rate was 5.5%. I looked at Burrow's over the last several years. 2021, 6.5%. 2022, 5.8% of his passes were a touchdown, then 4.1% last year. Herbert was 5.2% his rookie year, 21, 5.7%, 2022, 3.6%, 2023, 4.4%. And Stroud last year was 5.6%. I think that these types of guys, they're going to be good if they throw a lot of touchdowns. I know, shocker, right? Touchdowns are not super predictable. They're going to have up years and they're going to have down years. The non-rushing guys, they're going to have variance. That's why we prefer the rushing guys. But as far as these guys, I kind of am willing to, if you could give me a first on top of Love, I would tear down from Stroud or Burrow in a heart to Love. Same with Herbert. So I view him as similar, and I just love that I can get him with that type of a price point. So that being said, JP, go ahead and talk a little bit more about why you love Love.
Oh, I love Love. Who doesn't love Love? For the Green Bay Packers fan. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, we know he sat behind Aaron Rodgers and he learned. And speaking on what you said with CJ Stroud having this similar touchdown rate there, I feel like their seasons were very similar. And it was both their first season starting. Stroud deserves to be higher because he was a rookie. He didn't have the experience in the NFL. It just makes me think a little bit. I'm like, should the gap be that big if it was both their first year starting? Anyways, I know he had more experience. Regardless, from week 11 on, this is what really, really impressed me about Jodan Love. Warren Sharp put out this tweet, and the stats here just were crazy to me. From week 11 on, despite being blitzed at the number 1 highest rate in the whole NFL, Jodan Love was number 1 in total touchdowns, in passing yards, in EPA per attempt. He had the lowest sack rate and interception rate, and his touchdown to interception ratio. He was the best in all of those. He was the second best and with the lowest interceptions with only one, and in first down rate, number two in both of those. And then he was third in completion percentage and third down conversion rate. I think we saw some growth. Like I said, this is all in his first year starting. He had like super young, inexperienced weapons, which you saw. There's already some growth there this season. But Jaden Reed, he led the team in receiving, and he was a rookie. Dontavian Wicks, some people argue that he's the best or second best, or most talented, more skilled player on that team. I know you love Wicks, David. I love Wicks as well. He was a rookie as well. Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, their top two tight ends were rookies as well. Dobbs, he was a second-year player. Christian Watson, he was the last guy. He was a second-year player, but he hardly even played. So I just think if these players all continue to grow together, you expect them all to get better. And if Christian Watson, especially if he stays healthy, he's that big play threat. I don't know. I just think he might even just take a little bit more of a step from where he was. And if he doesn't, if he continues here with the production that he had, with his age, he's just going to be a really good, reliable quarterback. And especially I love targeting him in 6-point and 4-point. I still like him. But yeah, David, tell us why you were a little bit lower on Jodan Love.
Yeah, it kind of feels weird being the lowest on Love out of this group, being the resident Packers fan here. Got my ownership stock right there. Packers owner here. And, the situation's great. I think LaFleur's an awesome coach. You mentioned a bunch of these weapons he has. LaFleur recently said both Wicks and Reed look excellent coming into year two. We hear Watson maybe has figured out his hamstring issue. This offense looks awesome. It looks great. And I am a fan of Love's. I just kind of think we need to pump the brakes a little bit. One of the big reasons is we've only seen one excellent season from him, and all those numbers JP just gave are great, but they were from week 11 on, and we did have to use a section of the season for a reason. He wasn't awful at the beginning, but he did have some games where he really struggled. If he's to have a down year next year, I'm not sure he's ever going to re-enter the potentially elite quarterback conversation. So just that lack of value insulation makes me hesitant to put him in the same tier as these other guys we're talking about. And the other thing I question is his ceiling. Is he going to be able to give me a 350, 400-point season? Is he going to be able to have a QB1 season? I'm not sure. That offense is very balanced. They just brought in Josh Jacobs as a free agent with a pretty decent contract. They drafted Marshawn Lloyd in the third, and LaFleur loves to run the ball. And the other thing I'll mention, this is also another little bit of information from Warren Sharp on X. I'm glad we didn't pull the same tweet here, JP. Otherwise, this could have been an interesting conversation. But the Packers had a 95% touchdown rate on goal-to-go situations, which is the best score for any team since 2000. So almost 25 years. Last year in 2022, or 2 years ago, in 2022, the Packers had a 50% touchdown rate in those same situations. Now, maybe it was just Jodan Love is that much better in 23 at playing quarterback than Rodgers was in 22. Not saying he's a better quarterback than all time or anything, but Rodgers didn't play very well in 22. So there's definitely some of that, but it also speaks to the volatility of touchdowns in these situations. So even if Love comes down to an average mark of that, I think we see a lower touchdown rate, which, as Justin was talking about, is very important for quarterbacks like Love. So I do think he has the opportunity to keep rising up these ranks, but I think he's maybe more of a tier 4 guy for me than a tier 3 guy, but right on that fringe. So I'll be rooting for him.
Right. I can see there could be some regression in like goal to go situations, but maybe we'll see a little bit more positive regression in the big time plays, with Christian Watson coming back. But when I see a rate that high, I definitely expect some regression as well. But yeah, it's just so tough because, like I said, the weapons were so young.
Yeah, gotta love the young players he's coming up with. We also love the young superstar wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals, Marvin Harrison Jr. And that added weapon, Trey McBride, etc., makes Kyler Murray an interesting value case. David, go ahead and talk to us a little bit about where you have Kyler and why.
Yeah, I still have him in tier 3. I think we all ended up agreeing with where he belongs in the tiers. I think maybe the market has him in tier 4 based on what I've seen, at least through startups and trades and things. I think he probably has, well, maybe Anthony Richardson, but I think he has the second best chance in this tier to move up, and that's only because Richardson's a little younger. Kyler has a better chance of moving up with an above average but not elite season, though, than anybody else in this group. That's just because what we've seen in the past. When he's healthy, he scores points. There's no denying that. His 19.9 points per game for his career. He has 2 seasons over 20, one of them at 23.7 points per game. So definitely a league-winning type season. Even in the seasons where he dealt with injury, he was over 18 points per game. So the consistency's there. Last year when he got back from his ACL injury, from that time on, he was tied for 8th in fantasy points per game. I'm not a doctor or anything, but I know this is a common narrative. This is something that I believe to be true based on what I've seen. But I guess if someone has data to speak otherwise, I'd love to read it. But typically players coming back from ACL injuries become more explosive in year two, and we see a noticeable difference between 1 and 2. So Kyler, with his athleticism, I do think year 2 will help him expand on his points per game. He'll be a little more athletic, he'll be able to run a little bit more. And then Justin, you kind of buried the lead at the top there. Marvin Harrison Jr., do I need to say more? He has an elite receiver again. Last time he was paired with D-Hop in his prime, they went out and balled together. D-Hop had like 1,400 yards in the year that Kyler scored 23.7 points per game. So I just love the marriage. I love his health. I think that offense is getting better. I think they're going to be playing from behind a lot. So I think a big year for Kyler is definitely in order.
Definitely hoping for that as well. I have a decent exposure to Kyler. To me, it's amazing having drafted Marv, McBride coming into his own. I just feel like his value should be a little bit higher than it is, especially given the fact that unlike the rest of the guys that we have in this tier, looking at it, we haven't seen this type of kind of sustained production that Kyler has been able to sustain when healthy. Herbert's had down years, as we mentioned, that those types of quarterbacks do. A-Rich, we've only seen a small sample size. So definitely, potential excitement for Kyler. Big concern for him, for me, is just the ability to stay healthy. But if he does, which we don't really like to predict injuries, etc., this man stays healthy. Wheels up. Let's go, baby. And JP, how are you feeling on him?
Yeah, I guess we all really like Kyler. I think that just speaks to how much we like that tier 3 in general. But as I previously mentioned with Anthony Richardson, those quarterbacks that provide, the 5+ fantasy points per game in rushing, they're good in fantasy. And Kyler's hit that 5 mark in 4 or 5 seasons. And the one that he missed was at 4.9. He was basically right there. And that was ACL season. So it makes sense. But yeah, I mean, after that ACL, he was averaging 22 fantasy points per game. He was still great. And that wide receiver room was pretty bad. We were at a conversation, and David, you highlighted like Marquise Brown only played 3 games when Kyler Murray came back because of the heel issue that he was dealing with. So yeah, I mean, he was playing with Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch. I know we got to love Greg Dortch love. I McBride, I think he's going to take a step forward going into year 3. We already saw him start to step up. I think if he's your second target and Marvin Harrison's your number 1 target, that's pretty solid. And I think Michael Wilson is a good wide receiver as well. So if somebody sees Trevor Lawrence in that same tier as Kyler, we talked about in our last episode, Justin, you found somebody that said, I like Kyler and Trevor Lawrence about the same. Yeah, I would definitely target Kyler if somebody doesn't think that he's in that tier. In our tier, we had like Purdy and Daniels and Lawrence. If you have any of those guys, are you trying to tier up to Kyler Murray?
Maybe not Daniels.
I was just going to say that probably not from Daniels. But
I think Daniels he's like right on that edge, right? Like he has a case to kind of be up there with Caleb in that tier. But if I have Trevor Lawrence,
my talking points for later.
Yeah, we're about to talk him. But Dak Prescott, tier up. I would take Dak, and I would definitely tier up to Kyler. You guys kind of in that same camp?
To be honest with you, Dak is probably the only one I'm not interested in tiering up from in that tier to Kyler. If I could laterally move to Kyler, but I think Dak has the same type of production ceiling. The other guys in that tier, Trevor Lawrence, Brock Purdy, Drake May, I would be looking to just because I feel more confident in Kyler's production versus those guys. For Dak, I think I'm just paying to get younger if I go to Kyler. Sure, I think Kyler has a little bit more high-end upside, but if I have to pay to go from Dak to Kyler, I'm probably not as interested.
Lawrence, Purdy, and May, we probably agree we're trying to tier up there. Dak, I understand what you're saying, Justin, but if I am trying to retool or get younger, then I think that's a great move to make. Daniels, if I'm trying to compete, maybe I will toss in a little something to get to Kyler just for the known, what we've seen from Kyler before, and we don't really know exactly what we're going to get from Jaden Daniels. But value-wise, they're not too far apart. They're a little closer than most players that are in different tiers. I think, Justin, I don't remember if you mentioned this on air or not, but Jaden Daniels almost belongs in his own tier in between 3 and 4.
No, that's in the next segment on the show sheet, David. You guys are killing me here.
You need to cut it out. Feel free.
Nope, it's fine. I just won't have a guy next segment. And no, what you were saying there too, I would definitely, if I'm not competing, kind of to go off what I was saying earlier, if I'm not competing, then yeah, I'd be willing to add to Dak to Kyler. But if I have a competitive build, I'm not looking to upgrade from Dak to Kyler just because I would rather have the liquidity. And the last guy we are going to talk about in our last tier, Michael Penix. Very, very interesting case. So I'm going to try to take a pro Penix case. Realistically speaking, the pro Penix case is that a lot of people are pro Penix. The thing is, most of those people that are pro Penix, they probably drafted him, right? There's not that many people who are looking to buy Michael Penix. And the thing is, if you just took Michael Penix in a rookie draft, in fact, I took him at 203 in one league just because I didn't want points on my roster to guarantee I could get the 101 the following year. So I took him there because I didn't want to take a wide receiver and hurt my max points for. I want the 101 next year. I'm hoping to be able to get that Michael Penix retains about that 203 value. I tried to trade him. I offered to all 11 other teams 25 or 26 first. I even tried to do like a 1-2 swap. Michael Penix in a second for a first, where I would move up an entire round because it was the same team's first and second. Wasn't able to even get that done. In Dynasty Daddy, it's very interesting. I see him going for a first all over the place. I see him going for a first plus in some trades. I can't get it done myself. I only have one share of Penix, so I wasn't able to try across multiple leagues. But it's an interesting case. I've done the best I can to be positive. What do you guys have?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like super pro Penix. I think the market value, I mean, I might be just a tad below where it's at. I mean, maybe part of it's because I'm a Falcons fan and I'm just want to cry every time I think about it. But regardless, no, Michael Penix, I mean, he's probably going to sit for at least 2 years. And I'm thinking it might be 3, maybe 4 if Kirk Cousins plays out the entirety of his contract. But it made me go back and look at the Jodan Love, his value, because getting traded, I would not trade a first for Michael Penix. This is my whole argument here because Michael Penix, his situation is going to be pretty similar to Jodan Love's here. And I looked at Jodan Love before the season. So after waiting, if you held him the entire time, you waited the whole 4 years. For the season, he was valued on Keep Trade Cut. I looked at the historical values. He was valued just a little bit behind a late first, so probably right around the 112. If you trade a first for Michael Penix, he might be worth a late first after 3 or 4 years. So I don't think that's a good move, because if you hold that long and he's then worth what you paid, that's just not the best way that you want to play it. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of him. I didn't love him as a prospect. Clearly, the Falcons love him, but I kind of agree with you a little bit, David, with what you're going to be advising people to do.
Like you said, I didn't love him as a prospect either. The Falcons did, and I'm willing to accept that the people that make decisions for the Falcons are better at this than me. But I still do have some concerns. I do have him on a roster. It's a best ball team where I'm rebuilding, so the 0 every week is actually important for me. It was part of the reason I drafted him. You look at most Superflex drafts, he's going early to mid-second. I think, Justin, you said you have him around the 203.
I don't have him at the 203. On any other roster where I'm not rebuilding, I would probably take him 205.
Gotcha. That's fair. That makes sense. But, you even look at Keep Trade Cut, he's ranked ahead of Kirk Cousins, the starter. Doesn't make sense to me. Cousins' contract, the Falcons don't have a realistic out for 2 years. That being said, they did take on a large cap hit with Matt Ryan. It was one of the first that I can remember, one of these first massive quarterbacks getting cut with a bunch of dead money. But I think if they cut Cousins after year 1 before year 2, it's like $50 million in dead cap. So it's just not advisable, especially if you're trying to compete around a young quarterback. So I don't see an out for them for at least 2 years. Penix was in college for 6 seasons, so he'd be 26 at that point as a starter. Had 2 ACL injuries to his right knee. So, anytime in practice, if that right knee goes out again, he could never start potentially. So, without a clear path to production, the other concerns we have, I just find it hard to believe that he's going to gain value over the next couple years, kind of like JP was talking about. Much more likely he's going to lose some value even. So if you like Penix, I just say buy him next year. I know that's not always possible. Maybe not in every league it's going to happen. And if Cousins gets hurt this year and Penix takes over, then you lose out on that opportunity. But I'm willing to risk that and just wait till next season and see where his value lies.
I think people, they get tired. If they have him sitting on a roster or something and they feel like they need, I think you probably could buy him next year. Don't know for sure, but yeah, I mean, if I could trade him mid to late second next year, and then you're another year closer to him starting. And I brought this up to you guys. Who's older, him or Michael Penix or Trey Lance? It's crazy. This dude is so much older. Like, Trey Lance is 1 day younger than Michael Penix. So even when he does start, he's going to be like close to.
He's 24 right now, so he'll be 26 in 2 years from now.
I agree. I think I would try to trade for him next year, and people start to get a little tired and stale, of him being on the roster.
Yeah, those 4 stood out as guys that were good fits for this video, but they're not the only QBs that are difficult to rank. JP, give me a guy that you think that there's some disparity in how he's ranked first where he could go.
Yes, someone who's pretty hard to evaluate right now is Trevor Lawrence. I personally think that he's a really good quarterback and he's going to be around for a long time. I mean, he's in line to get a big contract extension. I think that they're going to be getting that done sometime here soon. They're going to want to keep him around for sure. But I mean, he had high expectations. He brought them to the playoffs. He won a playoff game against the Chargers, and so we had big expectations for him. I don't know, it just didn't work out, and I maybe it's because Calvin Ridley, he came in after not playing for so long and they couldn't get the chemistry down. And I tell you what, I don't know if you guys have seen the videos. Have you guys seen the videos with how many near misses where the wide receivers just did not get 2 feet in? I've never seen anything like it. It's insane. Like, he easily could have had like so many more touchdowns and yards and third down completions. Regardless, I was going to really drop him in my rankings a lot if they didn't draft a first round wide receiver. But they did. And Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, he's good. Man, I mean, now with Brian Thomas Jr. there, I'm still kind of interested. I just hate that they had Press Taylor calling plays. They took it out of Doug Peterson's hands. He looked way worse. I don't know why. Doug Peterson, you're the head coach. Take over the play calls. I think there is some room for him to grow a little bit. But, yeah, he's just hard to pin down right now. I don't know what to do with him.
Yeah, that's a fair one. I have two guys that I'm going to talk about very briefly. First, Jalen Hurts. I think that just with where he's finished the last few seasons, he's just so good at scoring fantasy points. I know there's this tush-push concern. Maybe we'll see that he doesn't do as well with that, with Kelsey, not Travis, retiring. However, I'm all in still because I think he'll be an elite producer. Other guy, Jaden Daniels, we talked about him earlier, so going to be very brief, but I think that he very easily could tier up to a first-round startup pick next year if he just does pretty well, could have that Anthony Richardson type of trajectory. Who are your guys there, David?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to mention one here. For me, it was Brock Purdy. I know we have questions about how good he actually is. He's probably a pretty good quarterback, to be fair, but you can't deny that he's propped up by an elite situation, maybe one of the best that we've seen in my lifetime for a quarterback. An elite play caller, probably the best in the league, probably the best skill position group in the league, a great defense on the other side, a good offensive line, Christian frickin' McCaffrey in the backfield. Like, what would you want to change if you got to change anything? I don't know. The only real question marks, it seems like they might trade one of their receivers. They're going to have to pay him soon. But other than that, I mean, I think he's going to stay in San Francisco for a while. I think they're going to have good weapons around him. So, I can see why he gets the rank he does, but I kind of expect him to maybe settle into that like Tua Goff, JJ tier of guys that are young-ish, but don't necessarily have elite upside, but you're happy to plug in at quarterback too. So yeah, I'm not sure he belongs in the tier we have him in, but it's hard to move him out of it.
So please let us know which of these players we've talked about or any other players that you are interested in discussing, where you have them, where we're wrong, in the comments below. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dino Construction Podcast. We hope this was as useful for you as it was for us and from all us here at Dino Construction. Until next time.